135.6 years. Seriously, let that number just sink in for a second. According to 2021 data from the World Economic Forum, that is exactly how long it's going to take to bridge the gender gap worldwide. We're talking more than a century. That literally means neither we, nor our kids, nor even our grandchildren will see a world of true gender parity if things keep moving at this current pace. It's a completely staggering projection, and frankly, it should create an immense sense of urgency for all of us.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the hard data and the deeply rooted cultural realities behind this massive global issue, and we'll be focusing specifically on the situation in India. We're going to unpack the raw numbers, understand the daily realities people are facing, and figure out what actionable steps are required to actually accelerate change. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The global gender gap. 2. Where India stands today. 3. Root causes of inequality. And 4. The road to equality. Let's jump right in. Section 1. The global gender gap. To ground our explainer today, we're relying on a really comprehensive academic paper from the Indian Journal of Development Research and Social Action. It was written by Dr. S.V.J. Kumar, and it's called Gender Gaps, with special reference to India. And Dr. Kumar's research is absolutely vital here because it doesn't just look at economic metrics. He argues passionately that economic development alone just isn't enough to shrink these disparities. We need what he calls gender-inclusive development. But before we go any further, let's make sure we're on the exact same page. What do we actually mean by gender gap? Well, it refers to the differences between women and men, especially regarding economic, social, political, intellectual, and cultural aspects. To measure this globally, the World Economic Forum created an index back in 2006 that looks at 4 crucial pillars: economic participation, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. By tracking these 4 specific areas, we get a really accurate picture of where the world stands. And the data proves that progress is absolutely possible. Look at the number 12. For 12 consecutive years, Iceland has held the #1 spot as the most gender-equal country in the world. They're followed by countries like Finland, Norway, and New Zealand. So closing this gap, it isn't just some utopian dream. It is an achievable reality when the right policies and societal shifts actually happen. Section 2. Where India stands today. Now, the contrast here gets pretty stark. Out of the 156 countries benchmarked by the World Economic Forum in 2021, India ranks 140th. So while Iceland is sitting way up at the top, India is actually the 3rd worst performer among South Asian countries. It even trails significantly behind regional neighbors like Bangladesh, which sits at 111th. And honestly, the trajectory is what the source material highlights as deeply concerning. In just one single year, from 2020 to 2021, India slipped 28 places in these rankings. The overall gender gap widened to 62.5%. Why? Well, a massive factor was political empowerment. The data shows this metric took a nosedive from 23.9% down to just 9.1%. On top of that, women's labor force participation decreased, and their estimated earned income dropped to just 1/5 that of men. The pandemic definitely worsened these numbers for sure, but it also heavily exposed vulnerabilities that were already there. Section 3. Root causes of inequality. To really understand those vulnerabilities, we have to dig into the deeply entrenched socio-cultural roots driving these numbers. Dr. Kumar's paper makes this piercing observation about a cultural dissonance. He notes that India has traditionally been almost schizophrenic in its treatment of women. On one hand, women are worshipped and revered in cultural and religious contexts, but on the other hand, in practical everyday reality, the girl child is often neglected. This paradox, worshipping the idea of women while systemically disadvantaging actual women, is a massive barrier to progress. Okay, this next stat completely shatters a common stereotype about physical labor. Let's talk about agriculture, which employs over half of the Indian workforce. A staggering 78% of rural women are engaged in agriculture, compared to 63% of rural men. Think about that. In fact, about 70% of all farm work in India, we're talking weeding, transplanting, harvesting, is done by women. Yet, as the source points out, when it comes to property and land ownership, women are at a severe disadvantage. They're doing the heavy lifting, literally, but lacking the ownership. The source material actually identifies 13 distinct causes for the gender gap in India. To make them a bit easier to digest, we've categorized them into 4 core themes. First, economic. Women face heavy burdens of unpaid domestic work and a huge lack of employment facilities. Second, social. Deeply rooted patriarchal norms, traditional beliefs, and a really strong cultural preference for sons. Third, health.
issues ranging from malnutrition across all stages of life to severely skewed sex ratios. And fourth, political, a stark lack of representation and decision-making power at higher levels.
Tackling these themes requires foundational changes, and that has to start with education. The paper quotes Mahatma Gandhi, who once said, "If you educate a man, you educate an individual, but if you educate a woman, you educate an entire family." Think about the compounding effect of that. Educational inequality is a fundamental roadblock. While the literacy gap has shrunk, qualitative differences are still there, like families sending their boys to private schools and their girls to government schools.
And this lack of equal footing in education directly fuels the economic side of inequality. Listen to this stat. It is incredibly telling. Of the 30% of people living below the poverty line in India, 70% of them are women. Poverty in this context is fundamentally a gendered issue. It's rooted in a woman's lack of access to economic resources, lack of land ownership, lack of inheritance, and a lack of access to credit. Economic dependence on male counterparts is both a symptom of this disparity and a cause. Moving over to health, the source highlights a deeply disturbing trend regarding India's sex ratio. The paper cites Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, who frames sex-selective practices not just as a healthcare failing, but as a severe form of technological bias and gender-based violence. He refers to the abortion of female fetuses as natality inequality and powerfully calls the misuse of ultrasound technology for sex determination high-tech sexism. This cultural preference for sons, mixed with modern technology, creates a severe demographic crisis.
Section 4. The Road to Equality. So what is the solution? The author's central thesis is that higher incomes and raw economic development by themselves do very little to reduce these entrenched gaps. If we rely on just economic growth, we're going to be waiting those 135.6 years. Instead, the ultimate goal has to be gender-inclusive development. We need highly focused, corrective policies that actively integrate women into the development process. But look, policy alone just isn't going to cut it. The source emphasizes that true change requires a synchronized effort, a shared responsibility across all of society. First, men absolutely must change their attitudes and challenge traditional gender roles. Second, police services have to shift to a preventative approach regarding women's safety rather than just reacting after the fact. Third, the media needs to actively challenge gender stereotypes and promote positive images of women. And fourth, the government has to strictly enforce the laws already on the books.
A huge piece of this puzzle actually starts at home. The paper strongly argues that we need to view unpaid care work as a major human rights issue. Women and girls spend a totally disproportionate amount of time on home-sustaining work, which prevents them from seizing new economic opportunities. The explainer source lays out a three-pronged approach here. Policies must recognize this unpaid care, work to reduce the drudgery of it, and fundamentally redistribute it from women to men and from individual families to communities. To make this happen, Dr. Kumar outlines several very specific, highly actionable policy items to drive immediate gender-inclusive development. This includes strict enforcement of the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act and the PNDT Act to stop illegal sex-selective abortions. He highlights the vital role of NGOs in promoting self-help groups to build financial autonomy. He stresses the absolute necessity of strict implementation of universal education for all children below 14. And above all, policies must be designed to enhance women's direct decision-making power in both the household and society. The paper concludes by drawing on the philosophical resonance of Swami Vivekananda, who famously said, "A nation which doesn't respect women will never become great now and nor will ever in future. Arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached." It's a really powerful reminder that the destiny and greatness of a nation are inextricably tied to the status, safety, and empowerment of its women. We've seen that 135-year projection. We've seen the stark data on political empowerment, the cultural paradoxes, and the heavy burden of unpaid and agricultural labor. But we've also seen the clear, actionable roadmap for gender-inclusive development, a roadmap that requires shared responsibility from the government, the media, our communities, and us as individuals. So the question I want to leave you with today is this. Looking at this deeply systemic issue, what role will you play in your own life and community in fostering true gender-inclusive development?